across multiple restarts, then you can uncomment the URL for file and store database as a file. Then you comment out the URL. To connect to a JP database, you will need to pass an URL followed by a user and password account. So you will need to use SQL authentication. So most databases requires you to use SQL authentication by passing a username and password. So some bad habit you guys have from your .NET course is integrated authentication. Typically when you deploy your servers on different machine, you will not be able to use integrated authentication. And integrated authentication is more specific to the Windows operating system. Later on, if you want to switch to a different database, hey, I want to use a Postgres SQL database. There's a data source definition provided for you that you can uncomment for Postgres SQL. That's configured to the correct Postgres database running on your host VM machine. So your first iteration, always use the H2 first. Once H2 works, then you can switch to a different database. H2 is lightweight and fast. It uses less memory, okay? So you don't have to spin up a database engine. So we completed 1B. Our next step is 1C, where we have to configure our persistent XML. Okay. So we have to navigate to this directory and delete the existing persistent XML file. Okay. So there's a recorded persistent configuration file called persistent XML that's located under SRC main resources meter inf. Okay. We will need to delete this file that's generated by the IDE IntelliJ and create our own version. So we go to our project. There is existing persistent XML file. Delete the file. So because if you open up, this is incomplete. Okay. The existing persistent XML file generated by the IDE is incomplete. Okay. So you can delete this one and use the file template provided for you to generate a new one where the persistent unit is already configured. When you try to delete the file, you get the following warning. Delete. For persistent XML, make sure you uncheck Save Delete. Okay. Since we are already creating another version of the file, you can uncheck the option for Save Delete. Otherwise, it's going to search for other files that reference this one and refactor the code. We'll turn it off because we're going to replace this file. Okay. So delete it. Okay. So delete it. Okay. So the second file template that was provided for you was this one. Okay. So the second file I told you guys to add was DMIT 2015 Jakarta persistent XML file. So now you can select the file. So under SRC, resources, meter inf, you can create a new DMIT Jakarta persistent XML file. And so this has to be created under SRC main resources meter inf. You create a new file using our file template. DMI 2015 persistent XML file. The persistent XML file contains one to many persistent unit. Persistent unit is a single database you want to access. If you need to access multiple databases, then you can define multiple persistent units here. Okay. So a persistent unit contains a name you, the developer, assign. The transaction type has to be JTA for enterprise application. The JTA data source maps to your application config. So I'll open up our application config. I'll drag it down. I'll show you a relationship here. Okay, so this name must match this one case sensitive. Okay, so the link is as follows. Okay. So in persistent XML, when you define persistent unit, it needs to know which database you want to connect to. This is done using an element called JTA data source. Okay, so JTA data source is a name that we assigned in our application config. Okay, so these two must match, case sensitive. So already wired up, so there's no change for your part. Okay, so next, some information we'll reference if we need to deploy our application to the cloud. Properties will be changing. Okay. If you're using a code first approach, where you want your cloud persistent to generate the database table, you will need to set this property here that ends with database.action. Okay, so there's 4 possible values: drop, dash, and create, update, and none. So drop and create simply means delete all the tables and its data and recreate them, which is only fine for development database. Never do that for production database. Otherwise, you'll be the famous person, first day of work, what happened to our database data? It's all gone. Yeah. So in a big company, typically you don't have permission to drop databases. Typically this happens more for a small size company where they give you too much permission. So this is done, so we're going to just reference back here later on. Actually, we can change this right now. Let's change this to drop and create. Since we are using a code first approach, so first example, we want to generate the database table. So we'll just change this value from none to drop and create. So each time our application starts, we'll delete all the table data and drop all the tables. Then we'll recreate them. Okay, which is fine for development database. Again, don't try this in the production database. So we have drop and create. It will try to do this each time. Okay? If you don't want to, once you create it, if you no longer need to change it, you can always change this back to none. Okay? Okay, so we have completed step 1. We have configured our JPA environment to use an H2 database. We have defined the H2 JTA data source. We have configured persistent XML with persistent unit that uses our H2 database. The next step is managing our entity classes. Okay, so this week we'll use a code first approach, where we'll code our Java class first, then we'll generate our database tables. This is known as code first approach. So this is when you have a new application with no existing database. In that case, you can actually generate the database table based on the Java code. To create your entity class, you can use the dirt file template. Okay. The dirt file template is DMIT 2015 Jakarta persistence entity class. So this file template generates the minimum code recommended for an entity class. When you use this template, it's going to prompt you for the name of the entity class. So you can enter like student. Right. It's going to ask you for the primary key data type. So you have three choices for the primary key data type. You can use an integer number, you can use a string, or you can use UUID. If you want the database to generate the value, you can use a long or UUID. If you want to write your own code to generate a new primary key, then you change it to a string. So we'll create a package called DMIT2015.model. Okay. Our entity class is going to be inside a package called DMIT2015.model. So DMIT2015.model. So in previous semester, we used to call it, I put in a package called entity. Now I just combine them into a common package called model. So this can be any classes that contains data for the application. It doesn't have to be data in the database. It could, but it doesn't have to. So on model package, now we can use our template. So use the DMIT 2015 Jakarta persistent entity class file template. Okay, so in the DMIT 2015 model package, right mouse click on it and select the option new, then locate the custom file template DMIT 2015 Jakarta persistence entity class. Okay, so the entity class I'm going to demonstrate is using student, the same one that we've been using our Firebase app. Okay, so next, the question there.
Yeah, is this the same entity like that we use for previous assignments?
Yeah, if you work in assignment 3, it would be the same entity that you use for your previous assignment.
Okay, thank you.
So if you use this computer or chess, you use computer or chess.
Okay.
Or for. Okay, so next, you need to determine what data type you want to use for the primary key to unique identify student. You want to keep it as a string like what you had before, or you want the database to generate it. Okay, so a database can't generate a string value, it can only generate an integer value or grid. Okay. So what you guys want to use? You want to use a number or you want to keep it as a string? So when you use a number, you use long, capital L long. So we want the database to be generated, so we have to use an integer type. So that means integer or long. Long is a better practice. It allows you to store many rows over 2 billion. If you have integer, you're limited to 2 billion rows. If you have a short, that's about 32,000 rows only. Since storage is cheap these days, I always use long for numeric primary key. Okay. The column length is not important if you're not reading from a CSV file, and we can always change this later on. Okay, so we're not reading from a CSV file, so I'll just type in 3. Okay, so from a CSV file, I can read the first name, last name, and cross section. Okay, so this number you enter now is not important because we are not reading from a CSV file yet. Okay. So we'll click OK. So let's look at the file that's generated for us. It creates a new Java class with the class name we enter. To identify this is the entity class, it already asks the entity annotation. If the table name is mapped to a different table name, you can uncomment this table here and pass in the new table name. If your table is inside a schema, then you can type in the schema name here. If the primary key is a long, you can leave that generated value. Okay, so generated value means that database engine is going to assign a value for the ID. Okay, so next, the database is going to generate column for ID. So not a good idea. So let's change this to a better name. This is called the student ID, student underscore ID. Make sure you don't have a space space is underscore. If you're generating an ID, or this, I'm just gonna take out the space. Otherwise, you guys are gonna put a space here. You're gonna crash. So you use snake case. Okay, so when you generate a table, it's not a good idea to have a column for ID, because in some database, ID is a keyword. Okay, so when you generate a table, the primary key is called student ID, or preferably student underscore ID. I'm going to avoid underscore here because you're going to put a space, it's going to crash. Column name should not have spaces. Okay, so now your job is simply, okay, what other fields do you need to track? Okay, so here's 2 details. You add a field for each column in the database. So we are tracking first name, email, last name, and course section. So you can put some constraint on it, so not blank. So message first name is required. Repeat that for last name. And so inside the class, you can use bean validation annotation also. So we want to put some constraints. I can say, okay, when you assign a first name before you save it to the database, make sure it's not blank. Same thing for last name. We're not going to make course section required. That's optional. It can be no. And one last thing, we also want to store a picture of the student. Besides the first name, last name, which is course section name, I want to store a picture of the student. This time, we want to store the picture as binary data. Okay, so in Java and C#, what data types allows you to store binary data? Is a byte array. Okay? So we'll call this picture. Okay? So byte declaring array in Java is similar like C#, square brackets. raw data is simply a byte array. Okay. Next, we need to use a special annotation to tell, we call it persistence, on how to store this binary array. So we use the annotation for @log. Okay, so large object binary. @log is required if you want to store binary data in your database. Okay, so in the SQL Server, it can be an image or binary data type. In Oracle, is a club or blob. Again, this would be optional. Okay, so a student has to be at their first and last name. The core section can be assigned later on. And the picture is optional. Once I'm done this part, I can remove the to-do comments.
So Boolean value would be bool or Boolean?
Use Boolean. Always use the wrapper type in case you want to change it to null later. So delete that one. Okay. Okay. We have another to-do indicated here. So if you see this green dot, it's not a to-do. So we have added fields for first name, last name, core section, also a picture.